I'm struck by how many people in this or other countries aren't paying particular attention to the world, despite for better and for worse. And it's not only bad, it's not only risks or costs or threats, but given the objective importance, I'm always taken aback by the lack of understanding about how the world works, about why it matters. What really makes this era of history fundamentally different from any other in modern history, and by that I mean the last few hundred years, is the importance of global issues. We've talked about climate, terrorism, infectious disease, the non-regulated cyberspace, proliferation, trade, investment, the flows that are so fundamental, and again, for better and for worse, that's qualitatively different than what we've seen historically. So it's this combination of the return of geopolitics, the emergence of global issues, and now the parallel emergence of our American reluctance to be active in the world. It's the combination of these three things, I'll be honest with you, that keeps me up at night. I'd say a couple of things. You can't assume the next 10 or 20 years are going to be as relatively stable as the last 10 or 20. I would think that the potential for turbulence, for conflict, which then has implications, I think the odds of that are greater. I think the idea of being 100% dependent on a single foreign source of a critical material, I think those days are over. And for some, it may mean diversifying foreign supply, easier said than done. I think you'll see greater push for domestic stockpiling around the world. I also think you're going to see probably a greater push for domestic production requirements, because that would actually also dovetail with the need to put more people back to work. But I think we're seeing the greater nationalization of supply chains. Well, if the basic point about the world we're living in is global issues matter a lot, that globalization is a reality. To me, the corollary to that point is responses are better when they're collective. I can't think of anything any country does that they're better off doing it on their own. Rather, they want to find partners. But increasingly, what I think we need to think about is how do we forge what I call coalitions of the willing, able, and relevant to deal with particular challenges. And it may be enough or as good as you can do initially to get 40 or 50 or 60% of the world's countries or economies together to work on this or that particular challenge, whether it's setting rules for the internet or dealing with climate change. Businesses have now a vested interest in helping to shape the environment. I mean environment in the largest sense of the word, not the physical environment, but the legal, the political, the economic environment in which, the regulatory environment in which they operate. It's almost as if businesses are going to need their own equivalent of a foreign policy, that they are going to need people who are tasked to think about what are the either negotiations that are going on or the institutions that exist that affect their welfare, or more future-oriented, more proactively, what needs to happen. I actually think businesses need to be much more creative and innovative and really think more in foreign policy terms. It used to be that businessmen and women always said, you in the public sector have got to become more like us. And maybe in some cases that's true. But what's so interesting to me is how increasingly people in the business world, the corporate world, have to become more like people in the public policy world. And that to me is what's so interesting about, say, 21st century. It's global, but even both as well as domestic, far more, whether again it's employees, far more stakeholders, far more state, local, federal governments, international bodies, far more transparency thanks to social media. So when I look at a CEO's world, one of the reasons it's so hard for me to get the amount of time I used to be able to get from them on their calendars is that their calendars are filled up more. And the reason is they are being looked at and attacked and regulated and questioned from far more directions. And that's essentially what it used to be like and still is in the public sector, that you just don't have the freedom of action that businesses and companies used to have a generation or two ago. I think actually their world has become much more like the public policy political world, and I think they're catching up to that reality. I would say we need to spend more time thinking about these global challenges, whether it is infectious disease or climate, a long list of them. And again, we can't successfully contend with them unilaterally. We can't ignore them either.